Welcome back, fellow aircraft builders and aviation enthusiasts. I'm still working on some camera equipment upgrades and testing, so this is another good opportunity for me to do one of these little talking head videos, if you will. And this one is going to be the follow-up to why I'm building the STOL CH750 video. This is the why I chose the Corvair video. I've mentioned having selected a Corvair engine conversion several times in various videos up to this point, but I have a couple disclaimers. One, first and foremost, I'm not a mechanic, not an auto mechanic. I'm not an airframe and power plant mechanic or any sort of engine expert. I've turned a few wrenches on my own vehicles over the years, but at best I am a self-taught shade tree amateur mechanic. At worst, I'm just a hack. So, as of this video, I do not yet have a running Corvair engine, and I've also never flown behind a Corvair engine installation. So take that for what it's worth. You know, these projects are years long, and it can sometimes take 8 to 10 years to get up into the sky with your chosen engine and airframe combination. But just understand, I am by no means an expert, and I'm going to put links in the description below so that you can research Corvair engines more if you'd like to. So also, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you in two segments. So the first part of this video is going to be mainly why I chose the Corvair and my reasoning behind that. The second part of this video is going to be a little bit about some of the risks and benefits of choosing an automotive engine conversion for your airplane. So there's a lot to consider. It's a ton of information. It's not an easy decision to make, and it should not be made lightly. So that's why this is going to be the two-part video that goes beyond simply just why did I pick a Corvair. So let's get into it. So the main reason that I chose the Corvair, especially initially, was strictly on price. The compelling reason for any automotive conversion is that it's very likely, unless you're talking at the extremes of performance or uncharted engineering territory or things like that, typically an automotive conversion is going to be cheaper to install in your airplane than a zero-time factory rebuild or factory remanufactured certified motor. And generally it's also going to be cheaper than an airplane-specific engine, even if it's an experimental or non-certified version like, say, a Rotax Jabiru or UL Power. Those are expensive engines for good reason, but generally your automotive conversions are going to be a little cheaper. Another reason that I selected the Corvair was that I could assemble the engine. So instead of building my airplane but having to take it to an A&P mechanic to, say, overhaul the engine or work on an engine problem, I'm going to be very familiar with the internal workings of my engine because I will have built it myself using custom parts and a builder's manual to do it. But I'll be very, very familiar with the engine and therefore able to do my own maintenance on it and rebuilds. Again, that translates to cost savings, but I also like turning wrenches, so I want to be able to work on the whole thing, not just the airframe. So of the applicable conversions, automotive conversions that were out there at the time and still available today, to me, the Corvair seemed to be one of the more proven designs, one of the more reliable engine conversions out there for a number of reasons. One is that it's an air-cooled engine. So very similar to your typical Continental or Lycoming horizontally opposed piston engines that are air-cooled, the boxer-style engines. A Corvair engine is built that way. Ideally, I didn't want a liquid-cooled engine because to me that introduces another point of failure. You can certainly overheat an air-cooled engine, but if you overheat and then boil off the coolant in a liquid-cooled engine, or if you spring a leak, your engine's just going to overheat, or it's just simply not going to be able to ever cool itself again until you rectify the problem. With an air-cooled engine, unless you're melting off cooling fins, which is highly unlikely, you can usually address the problem in flight by slowing down or making a change to increase airflow, and the engine never really loses its original cooling power. So I really like the reliability of an air-cooled engine over a liquid-cooled engine. It's by no means a guarantee of any kind. You can still overheat an air-cooled engine. You can still cause problems with an air-cooled engine, and it can develop other problems too. But I was attracted to the air-cooled aspect of the engine. Again, in design-wise, it's very similar to a normal airplane engine. What I liked about the Corvair, and particularly in the horsepower range and installed weight of the engine, which is similar to a Continental O200, is that it has 6 cylinders instead of 4 cylinders. So there's more cylinders, and I guess hence more things that, more points of failure potentially because there's more parts. But the smaller mass of each cylinder in a comparably sized 6-cylinder engine means that it's going to run more smoothly generally. The word on the street is basically that a 6-cylinder Corvair engine, if it's built properly, pretty much runs almost like an electric motor, much more smoothly than a 4-cylinder of similar displacement. So furthermore, in a direct drive application, the Corvair makes about 100 to 120 horsepower depending on how you have it configured. I'm actually shooting for the 100 to 110 horsepower version of it with the overboard cylinders and things like that, but I don't need a reduction drive or a complicated transmission system to drive the propeller. So in an automotive conversion, typically the automotive engines make their horsepower at a much higher RPM than we can use in flight motors. And so some engines like Rotax, its horsepower rating is at a higher RPM, so they have to use a reduction drive in order to slow the propeller down to make it appropriate for a flight motor. Again, we're back to the simplicity and reliability. I don't even have to mess with a reduction drive or a transmission or a complicated belt drive or anything like that. In direct drive form, the Corvair will put out about 100 to 120 horsepower. So I like that platform. Furthermore, the Corvair has excellent engine core availability. There's one caveat to that. Sometimes they're hard to find, not because they don't exist and not because the engine cores aren't out there. It's just, they might be squirreled away in a barn somewhere, or somebody's got a collection of them, or, whatever. But rest assured, there's plenty of Corvair engines out there. And to put it into perspective, General Motors made 1.7 million of them in the 1960s. That's way, way, way more engines than, say, Continental or Lycoming made. So even though many of those engines ended up in the scrapyard, many of those engines also are not applicable to flight motor conversions because there were different versions of the engine made over the years. Generally speaking, there's going to be plenty of engines still out there today, and so far the engine supply to source a core motor has not been a problem. At the time that I decided to build the Corvair, the advertised conversion price for the engine was roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $7,000, depending on how you wanted to set it up, and depending on if you could do some of the work yourself, or maybe you had a local machine shop that was going to do some of the stuff for you, depending on shipping things back and forth and stuff like that. So I was banking on about $7,500, so $7,500 to do my conversion over a few year period. That's changed a little bit. Currently, if you're going to do a Corvair engine conversion, unless you are a machinist, okay, generally speaking, you're probably going to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $12,000 for a conversion. Now, part of that is due to inflation. The price of materials have gone up over the last 10 or 15 years. And keep in mind, when I decided on the Corvair, it was roughly 1999, 2000, 2001, and then I got started on the conversion itself in 2004. That was a long time ago, over a decade ago. Prices are higher now. But the new conversion pricing includes a wider range of engine options. Almost everything now in the engine is either new or remanufactured in some way. The original parts that you're going to use out of a core engine are the case, maybe the head studs and the case studs if you don't replace those, but they are replaceable. The oil pump housing, a few other bits like the oil pickup and some other parts. You can have your connecting rods rebuilt, or you can buy new ones. You can have the crank shaft rebuilt, or you can buy a new billet one. So depending on which way that you do the conversion, you'll have maybe some additional, or you may have more remanufactured parts than the next guy who may have elected to buy all new components. And furthermore, the big reason that the engine costs a substantial amount more than it did before is because back in the day, the fifth bearing for the engine didn't really exist. The Corvair from the factory is a 4 main bearing design engine, and it's almost universally accepted now that if you're going to put it in an airplane, you need to have a fifth bearing added to the engine to absorb the propeller loads and things like that, because Airplane duty and car duty are two different things. That adds about $2,000 to the price of the engine. So that right there accounts for most of the additional cost of the conversion. So the question I've often asked myself, and I get this question too sometimes from other people, is would I choose the Corvair engine conversion now? Obviously, I've been working on mine for going on 15 years, and very slowly, and I'm kind of married to it at this point. But would I choose it today if I was starting off fresh? I won't say 100% that I would, but it's very likely that I would. If price wasn't a factor, I'd probably buy a UL Power. But price is still going to always be a factor for me unless I win the lottery or something. But again, being able to do my own maintenance, being able to do my own inspections, being able to do my own rebuilds and all that other stuff, that's a huge factor for me. And the Corvair fits the bill nicely for that. So it's still a good match for my plane. I mean, there are some trade-offs I'll go into later, but it's a good match for my plane. The reliability is acceptable to me. And even though that the conversion price itself is higher now than it was 15 years ago, due to the factors I talked about before, rebuilds and overhauls alone are just going to be vastly cheaper. Nearly all of the wearable parts that you're going to rebuild the engine with can come from either the Corvair parts houses or the and I don't mean the flight motor houses, I mean the actual Corvair automotive parts suppliers online or wherever, and then your local auto parts stores. So the upfront cost for that conversion is mainly for things that should last the lifetime of the engine. You're talking things like a prop hub, your oil bypass assembly, crankshaft, you can replace all the pistons and the rings and the wearable items relatively cheaply, especially compared to an airplane engine. So all the custom machine work and some of the bolt-on parts like the starter mounts and brackets and all those special little things, those should generally last the lifetime of the engine. So a rebuild of a Corvair engine is going to be far cheaper, far cheaper than any kind of certified airplane rebuild or overhaul, or even just an airplane specific rebuild or overhaul like a Rotax or Jabiru or UL Power. I talked about the new conversion price today being higher. Again, it's the inflation, it's the additional parts that are required, like the fifth bearing addition and stuff like that, and then engine options. There's more available engine options, so you've got a wider range of things that you can choose from now than you could before, and I think that's a good thing. So does that mean that I won't eventually sell my Corvair or just pull it out of the airplane and install something different like a UL Power that I mentioned before? I might do that someday. I don't know. I mean, who knows? I'm not planning on doing that, but I might. We'll see. So if you're thinking about doing a conversion like mine or a Corvair conversion in general, there are 5 primary players in the Corvair arena. And this would be the people that supply, custom parts, do custom engine work, or both, or whatever, or supply completely built engines. So the first and foremost one, and this is the one that's at the top of the list, and I will argue that if you've never heard of this vendor before, you haven't, with regard to Corvair engines, if you're already researching Corvair engines and you've never heard of this vendor before, you haven't done nearly enough research yet. I mean, this should be at the top of any Google search or any place that you look or anybody that you talk to about Corvair flight motors. If this name hasn't come up before, you haven't even scratched the surface yet on the amount of research that you need to do. So that name is FlyCorvair. FlyCorvair is most likely the longest established Corvair engine conversion company, and probably compared to everybody else combined has been in the business longer. I know that they've been working on Corvair engine conversions for 20 plus years. One of the first available conversion manuals was published by FlyCorvair. They have, that's the blueprints, if you will, to convert the engine. They put on Corvair colleges. These are educational events that are largely free. There's no tuition cost other than maybe meals or reimbursement for refreshment type stuff. They put on Corvair college events across the country all the time, several per year. They have a full line of custom conversion parts, and they've done more than anybody else combined, I think, than for Corvair flight engine development. So they also sell complete engines. So they're the number one. If you've never looked on their website, you've never even heard of them, but you have already been looking at Corvairs, you need to dig deeper and get into the FlyCorvair information. So again, I'm going to put links to all this down in the description below. So the next big player is Sport Performance Aviation, or SPA for short. They are currently partnered with FlyCorvair, and they handle all of FlyCorvair's parts inventory, ordering system, and a lot of their manufacturing, parts manufacturing and things like that. In addition to that, SPA came up with two options for a fifth bearing installation. One is a retrofit, another one is if you're just starting to build the engine, you haven't converted it yet, there's a different fifth bearing option that is more appropriate if you're actually just building the engine. The other one is if you've already got the engine running and it's hanging on the front of the plane and you need to put the fifth bearing on it, you can do the retrofit version of that bearing instead. So they're one of the major players of the fifth bearing option. And they also have several options for complete engines or kit engines, the so-called engine in a box kit. You can buy everything you need to build your engine from them and have them shipped to you, and then you just put it together. They also are working on offering a kit plane, and I think you can actually order it now. It's called the Panther, and it can be built as a light sport. It's fully aerobatic. You can put certified engine on it. You can put a Corvair on it. So they do offer their own kit plane. The next player in Corvair Aviation is Azalea Aviation, and they also offer a Corvair conversion, and it's custom parts, a fifth bearing. He's got a different fifth bearing design that has a thrust bearing. It's a thrust bearing design, so it's a little different than the other ones. They do complete engines, custom parts, and they are also developing their own kit plane called the Saber Wing. So that's an option for you. The other two major players are more parts reconditioning houses or engine building houses. They're not like, a big catalog of conversion parts, generally speaking. So the first one is Roy's Garage, and that's the vendor that is doing my fifth bearing. So Roy's Garage has their own version of a fifth bearing that I've selected to use on my airplane, or my engine rather. And they also do full custom machining work and reconditioning of parts and, that type of stuff. So any of the modifications that you need to some of the things, or head rebuilding and stuff like that, they do all that in-house. Furthermore, they're only an hour away from me, so it's convenient. I don't have to crate my motor and ship it to them. I don't have to crate parts and ship it. I can just drive down the road, do whatever I need to do, and it's local, so I'm supporting my local community. And I've developed a pretty good relationship with them, so I feel comfortable having them work on my engine. So my engine's going to be built largely with FlyCorvair parts, almost entirely from FlyCorvair parts, but I'm using the Roy's Garage fifth bearing design and a few other parts that he's reconditioning for me. He sells complete engines, does custom engine builds, and is a full machine shop / builder assist type setup. So and then the next and final, I think, Corvair related flight service is Falcon Machine, and they were the original manufacturers of the rebuilt fully optioned intake heads that FlyCorvair used to sell. I think they do more of that stuff with a different supplier now, but Falcon Machine was one of the original kind of high-end intake head manufacturers for our conversions. He also does custom machining work for larger displacement Corvair conversions, and may also build some complete engines and things like that for customers. So if you do choose to go with a Corvair, or you're just researching the Corvair at this point, carefully evaluate any particular supplier's approach to the conversion. Check on their track record with other builders, what kind of support they provide, how long they've been in business, and things like that. And then of course make sure that you check out the links in the description below for information on the full range of services and parts that they offer, because these things can change at any time. All right, so that's the end of this part of the video. When I come back, I'm going to talk about some of the considerations that you should have when you're looking at potentially doing an automotive conversion for your aircraft. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you shortly. That's all for this video. Be sure to like, comment, or subscribe, and let me know if you have any requests for future video content. As always, thanks for watching, and good luck with your projects.